This is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed human.
Body Bags with Joseph Scott Morgan. There's an old adage among church folks that says, God don't make no garbage. That implying that anything that has the spark of life that is given to them by their Creator, that's a thing of beauty. It's a thing not to be disregarded, or in our case today, discarded. Some cases leave you with insufficient information, and I don't mean just as an investigator, but as a human walking this earth to make sense of. You think about a precious life. You think about all that remains of that life after it's come to an end. And then you think about the idea of hearth and home and a loving family, the gentle touch of a mother. Today, we're actually going to have a discussion about a young boy who was only 10 years old up in Illinois, Rock Island, Illinois specifically. And his name is Zion Staples. And according to what investigators are saying, his body was left abandoned in an old trash can. I'm Joseph Scott Morgan, and this is Body Bags. I have a routine, Dave. Once a week, I grab my city-issued garbage can, and I roll it out to the street and take it out, put it on the curb, and generally on Monday mornings, somebody that my wife and I really like a lot, our garbage man, comes by and picks it up. As a matter of fact, we make sure that he gets a present every year at Christmas. It's a hard job. I mean, it really is. And think about what you're dealing with. You're dealing with those things that are regarded as waste by people that occupy these homes. Either it's things that are biodegradable, or of course we have the recycling bin. And I never can remember when it's time to recycle. It's like every other week on a Wednesday, and inevitably I'll forget the cans are different colors and all that stuff. And Kim will say to me, you didn't take the recycling out today. I was like, oh God, I missed it again. I got to wait another 2 weeks. But the garbage can itself, I make sure that I'm on top of that, because you leave it by the house. First off, where are you going to put more garbage if you don't empty it? And then you invite pests around. It's foul. It's not something that you necessarily want to live adjacent to. And that's what happens with just about any kind of biological substance. It's going to break down. And part of being a death investigator, Dave, is we study these areas. We study decompositional rates.
Hey, Joe, before we get too far into decomposition, I want everyone to understand why we're talking about garbage cans, decomp. It's because police were asked to do a welfare check on a 10-year-old child after a neighbor became concerned about some offhanded comments made by the child's mother, Sushi Staples. Sushi Staples is a mother of 8, raising her children in the northwestern Illinois city of Rock Island. When police contacted Staples and asked about her son, she claimed she didn't have a 10-year-old son. Police knew better, and that gave them the ability to begin their search. As they're going through the home, they don't find 10-year-old Zion Staples. When they got to the garage, they found what they were looking for in a trash can. It was the body of 10-year-old Zion Staples, and he had been there long enough that the body was in a state of decomposition, which is why we're talking about this today.
Here's an interesting thing about decomposition. When you are smelling decomposition, it's closely tied with taste. Your olfactory senses and your ability to taste are connected. I think that's one of the reasons you never can get past it.
Zion Staples, not trash, but he's treated like trash.
Yeah, and that's what attracted me to this case, because it's kind of a case that is not typical of body bags, but it is something that needs to be explored, because I think that these circumstances come about with, I'm not going to say great frequency, but it does happen with individuals who abuse the dead. And that's what it comes down to. And I think that there's a lens that you can look through society. This lens of how we treat our dead is very reflective of how we treat others in our life, in the living world.
Then what shows now, between the dismemberments and the throwaways, we really do not cherish life the way we're supposed to.
We don't. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that we're as a society, we become very numb to it unless it happens to you and you're a person with a tender heart. But when you get so disconnected, and callous toward even family members, Dave.
Your 10-year-old son, you're going to be that dismissive of a 10-year-old son. Think about it.
Yeah, this is a child that you birthed, that you carried in your body for 9 months. This is a child that you fed, you cleaned, you bathed. Maybe you were engaged in their education or whatnot. You would listen to them as they would cry and try to explain things to you that were going on in their life. You try to give them wise counsel, even at the age of 8, 9, 10, and even before then. And this is what you decide to do when you allegedly find them deceased. I'm kind of amazed by the nature of this case, Dave.
I think because you're looking at it two ways. You're looking at it as you or I think about a child, our own children, grandchild. You're thinking about it. She doesn't. The mother here, Sushi Staples, she denies having a 10-year-old son. Police are there for a welfare check because others know she has a 10-year-old son. They haven't seen him. And when police ask her, I don't have one. Don't know what you're talking about. So when they find Zion Staples in the trash can wearing his Spider-Man PJ bottoms, and obviously he's been dead for some time, to solve this crime, they have to know when he died, right? And I'm wondering, Joe, is there any way really and truly to find out how long the child has been dead? Not necessarily in the trash can, because we don't know what happened before he ended up in the trash can. That's the end of the story. We've got a body in the trash can, but how do you figure that out? Is there a way that you can figure out when he died with any kind of certainty at all?
It's very difficult. And I find this very frequently when I speak with people, and even when I appear on other programs and whatnot, people will say, well, can you tell specifically when this happened? No, not scientifically. I always use the term bracketed. We can bracket times.
You mean like between this time and this time?
Yeah, specifically. And the way I kind of teach this, Dave, when we're talking about decomposition is in very broad terms. And you have to be very careful with it, because when you're teaching new police officers, or certainly my college students at Jack State, you don't want them to walk out of the door and into the field and believe that what they have learned at that point in time, they can go out and they can actually tell inquiring minds that they can tell you precisely when an individual died. Because in our world, that's one of the biggest fallacies of all. As a death investigator, one of the most daunting tasks that you have, I think a lot of people would think that it has something to do with bloodstain interpretation or perhaps injury interpretation, assessment, and that sort of thing. Those types of things are a bit more static than trying to assess a body that has been down for a long, long time. And over the years in the forensic science community, we've thrown a lot of resources in the areas of studying postmortem changes to try to narrow things down, because that's one of the biggest questions that we'll get at a scene, or the forensic pathologist will get. Hey, doc, how long has this person been deceased? And sometimes, Dave, I got to tell you, we don't have absolute answers.
I'm shocked at that. I really did think that, not like rings of a tree, but I did think that, I don't know what I was thinking, but it never really occurred to me that you couldn't. So I come and take your class at school, and when I get done, I leave there knowing that I've got a lot more studying to do. Doesn't it take years of experience to really know what you're even looking at, Joe? I mean, you open up the trash can and you see a body in there. You know it wasn't there yesterday. You know it was a while.
You would. And I think that, let me kind of tell you how this breaks down. If you have a body that is in a container like that's been down for, I think we're looking at like 7 months since the last time Zion was seen, Dave.
We know he hasn't been seen alive this year. We know that last time was in December. That's what we do know. Last time he was seen. Doesn't mean he was dead. They might not have seen him, right?
You're right. You hear the old report about people go to file a missing persons report on an adult, and they'll say, well, you got to wait this period of time, or they're an adult, they can do whatever they want to do. Not in the case of a 10-year-old. If you got a 10-year-old missing and the primary caretaker is not saying peep about it, Matter of fact, what was it you said just a second ago? When initial contact, she denied that she even had the child?
Yep, don't even have a child. I don't have a son. I don't know what you're talking about.
No wonder their radar went up. So how do you measure this? And let me tell you, I've had cases that are similar to this, and I think many people think that you would just find kind of the withered remains of a human in the bottom of this plastic container. That's not what you're going to see when you open this up after 7 months. To be brutally honest here, when you look within a container like this, let's face it, it's a plastic container. It holds on to a lot of bacteria. It holds on to a lot of moisture. Plastic sweats, and it'll go through these kind of evolutions. As it changes, the body is going to change within it. So you're going to have kind of this damp, wet mess, and sometimes it can be described as, for lack of a better term, soupy.
Would weather have an impact on the rate?
Yeah, it would. Let's say, for instance, and we're talking up in Illinois, so it's a bit cooler during the wintertime.
The mother had his body in the basement, but at some point, and I'm guessing because of the smell, and I feel like I'm being so disrespectful to say that.
No, that's the reality of it, man.
That at some point in time, and I don't know exactly when this was, but she moved the body from the basement of the house out to the garage. The basement odor is going to come right up through the vents. One thing police did find as they were investigating, you got to remember, they were called out there to see, hey, what's going on with this child we haven't seen anymore. They start looking, they find him that day. They're investigating and find the dryer towels. Dryer lint towels are the smell. Well, my wife calls them smell good towels. They're in the vents.
The fragrance towels, the little things that you put into your dryer.
She put them in there in the vents all around her house because Joe, I'd never even thought about that.
Listen, there are several odors in this world that you just cannot knock down. How many times have you've been in a work environment and somebody puts fish in a microwave? You can't escape it. Okay, imagine that smell and then multiply that about a factor of 10 when you're in an enclosed structure with a decomposing human being, and it is absolutely foul.
Those dryer sheets are not going to be strong enough to get rid of that.
They're not going to knock it down. And no matter what your efforts are in order to kind of thwart that smell. And here's one of the other really insidious things about this, Dave. This person allegedly moved this child around, migrated. Well, first off, I hate to say this, but she stowed him in the basement of this home and then decided, once the smell had gotten so foul, she moved him to this outer area inside of the trash can. Here's what is so very horrible about this. It's not just her smelling it, Dave. She's got little babies living in that house with her that are indwelling this same structure with this foul odor. All of a sudden, this foul odor becomes normalized in their day-to-day life. Let's just paint this just for a second. Let's step out down the road. Let's say, 10 years from now. The smell, how many times have you heard people say, smell the smell of a decomposing human being? You'll never forget it. And I've heard that over and over throughout my career. Think about that. And then think about the idea that not only do you have to do the calculus in your mind about that, but then you think, I smelled my brother decomposing all of this period of time. Do you realize how deep that scar would run? That's what this family in total has been subjected to, not to mention any visitors that she may have had. Now, one of the things I've found with people that leave the dead in the house, they'll do everything they can to avoid anybody outside of their little cocooned environment. They'll thwart them from coming over. They'll make excuses, or they'll meet them at the door and go outside just so that they don't come in. I don't know what the end game here was, but when the investigators would have gotten out to that scene, they would have seen this absolute jumble in the trash can. There's a high probability that after this period of time, you would have had at least some skeletonization that had begun to take place, because when decomposition, we look at postmortem changes in two ways. We have what are referred to, I refer to them this way. We look at it in a micro sense, and that is where, and you've heard me talk about this, Dave, rigor mortis, livor mortis, algor mortis, and then we look at gastric contents as well. And that's kind of a timing thing. But you know that those things, particularly rigor, livor, and algor, which is the cooling of the body, that is evidence of early sign of decomposition. That's in a micro sense. And that happens over a very short period of time, up to, we can measure out to about 36 hours with that. But once you get out beyond that marker in time, you get into the macro area where you'll be able to see changes in the human form at that point in time. And regardless of how the person died, the decomposition itself is defined as the disintegration of body temperatures after death. And so the body goes through what are referred to as autolytic changes, and the autolysis, if you will, that takes place. You have these enzymes that are beginning to release from these cells and these disintegrating cells, and they're freeing up everything that's contained within those cells, and it's leaching out, it's leaking out, and that spreads because the body, there's no longer any kind of metabolic activity that's going on in the body. So the body almost begins, in certain senses, particularly where it's really rich in enzymes, places like the liver, the pancreas, the body actually begins to digest itself. And so you can see that early on in the process, but as you expand out time-wise, when you're going down that linear timeline, it begins to leach out into other areas of the body and also externally. And you get changes in the color of skin. We have a factor that we look at. People have heard of, if you judge like a cut of steak, they refer to the marbling in the steak, and that's the little lines of fat that go. Well, we have a term called marbling in the assessment of decomposition. And after a period of time, you'll see literally the vessels in the human body. They'll turn kind of a black stained color, and you can follow the path of the vessels through the face, through the arms, and that's called marbling. And that takes a certain amount of time to happen. And what's happening is the blood that remains in those vessels begins to decompose in there. And so it changes color, and that's manifested on the exterior of the skin. All of these are these are markers that we look for with decomposition.
Would there be a difference between how the person died? For example, if I die of heart attack and I just don't feel like burying him in the backyard right now, I'm going to stick him in the trash and just take me and put me in a trash can. I die of natural causes. Or in this case, we know that he was shot in the head. We know this 10-year-old boy was shot in the head. And by the way, the reason we haven't jumped out to tell you who did it or what, they don't know who did it. They, being the investigators, still don't know. But we do know that he was shot in the head, and that caused his death.
Trauma can influence the rate at which a body decomposes in this one area. If you have a large open area, which many times you will have, say, for instance, if you've sustained like massive blunt force trauma to the head or an impact injury associated with a gunshot wound, that opens up that area. And all of the little nasties that come along with that, and I'm thinking larval development with flies and all that stuff, this can actually speed some of the decompositional process. But those areas that are contained, that are not associated directly with the trauma, they'll kind of progress at the same rate, but that injury is still going to impact the rest of the body. And you have to factor that in. What we don't know about Zion's death at this point is how extensive this gunshot wound is. And I have to tell you, when his body finally did make it to the coroner's office, there would have to be a painstaking examination that is going to involve everything from ballistics to postmortem x-rays. The biggest puzzles that we encounter, in my way of thinking, based upon my experience, have to do with decomposing bodies. And the more advanced the state of decomposition, and in Zion's case, we're talking about a little boy that was down for 7 months, the more steep the grade it is that you're going to have to go up in order to try to determine what happened to this precious little boy. And everything is clouded. It's all clouded with decompositional change, and it really makes your job difficult in any number of ways. But there are certain methods that we employ in order to try to at least take the first steps. The fact that his body is contained within a bag within the trash can makes it a bit simpler task. But here's the problem. You don't know how structurally compromised that bag is going to be. And buddy, once you lift that thing up, and remember, they had to open that bag at the scene in order to see what was in there. So now you've already kind of changed how it was left in a pristine condition to begin with. First off, I've had bodies that have been brought in cars. They're just not removed from the cars. They're brought into the crime lab that way, on the back of a flatbed, covered with a tarp, going down the highway with a body in there. I've had bodies brought in steel drums. because they were all contained within there. You crack the lid, you look down, you know that you've got human remains, you close it back down. And that way you can see the body in its pristine condition. My first reaction to this case, particularly since we know that Zion's remains were contained in a trash bag, is that they were probably extricated from the container and then placed into a body bag actually at the scene. And kind of let me tell you what happens now. First off, you have to take great care. If he is in, say, semi-fetal position in the base of this can, we have to imagine that he probably was, and he is in this state, it would take several hands to be able to go in and kind of lift him up and keep him in this same position so that nothing rearranges. You don't have, because you're talking about decomposition, what if you have a bone that pokes through the bag? You have to be able to contain everything that you possibly can to get him into a body bag. And here's something that people might not think about. You don't adjust his position relative to what suits your mindset, because we all think about it. Classically, we think about dead bodies in a funeral home where they're laying supine on their back with their arms crossed. That's atypical. If you ever see that at a scene, you walk in, you need to shut the scene down and begin to work that thing as something unexplained, because people don't die that way. All right. But you have to keep that body in the original position when you place it into the body bag and then seal it up. Then be very careful when you're transporting. And many times what we'll do is we'll double bag bodies just so that we don't lose anything. It stabilizes the body more. But once that body is back to the morgue and you have them in there, you weigh the body first off on the gurney. You subtract the weight of the gurney that the body is on, and you get a weight. And the weight may have changed with him significantly from what it was in life, because you're talking about a child that has been decomposing for 7 months. And that's significant because that gives you evidence that you've got tissue loss and compromise of tissue. Then before the bag is ever opened, Dave, you're going to take his body. They would have taken Zion's body into the cool room, placed him in a tray in this original position, and then they would have brought out the portable x-ray machine. And this is where you're really going to be able to determine what's going on, because up to this point, as a death investigator and in the world of the forensic pathologist, as they're looking at his remains, they're seeing a decomposing mass before them that has these horrible colors to it, dark colors, green, black, blue, those sorts of things, because this process is continuing on. And then if he has clothing, you remember the Spider-Man PJs that he had on, you can't visualize effectively with the unaided eye just looking at that body. One of the best tools that we have in forensics is actually x-ray. Most morgues have portable x-ray now. For a time they didn't, which is absurd. But you x-ray in totality the body. And the way, if you've ever been to the doctor and they tell you, put your chin up on the board, they're going to shoot you. And they shoot from, say, for instance, from the device is aimed at your back, it's going through. That's what's referred to as an AP shot. And then they tell you to turn to your side. That's a lateral shot. So that gives you position as you're looking at the body, and it gives you depth as you look at the side. And with a gunshot wound, if that's what they believe has happened in Zion's case, you want to know depth and you want to know position and depth relative to the trajectory, because this might be your best shot at assessing the movement of the body through the skull. If the projectile did not exit the body, and we don't know this as of yet, I hope that we'll find out very soon, you're going to have this, what's referred to as a radio opaque image that's going to show up on the x-ray, on the film itself. And it'll give you an idea as to where the projectile is located in the head. Here's one other thing that you'll see, and this can help you out when you're trying to determine the trajectory of the round. That means the path at which it took. The trajectory defines, was it from below to above, from above to below? And depending upon how many x-rays you take, you can do an assessment from left to right, right to left, or front to back. So you have to get all of these images before you ever touch the body. But one of the things you can pick up on these x-rays is pretty fascinating. If a bullet passes through the external table of the skull, two things happen. Many times the skull is going to fragment, and it creates almost like little bits of bone shrapnel, if you will, and they'll track along the path to a certain depth. And you can actually pick up on those, and it'll give you an indication of path. Also, sometimes with a lead core projectile, you'll see little bits of metal that will fleck off in the path of the bullet. It's kind of distributing these things before it finally comes to rest. And if the bullet actually passed through the body, let's say it comes out of the top of the head, maybe he shot in adjacent to the right eye, it comes out of the top of the head, the left, I don't know, let's say the left parietal area up behind the left ear, that bullet might be lodged in a wall somewhere and it's been covered up. Remember, he's been down for 7 months. So that x-ray is going to be one of the key pieces of evidence that you're going, or it's one of the key things that you use as a tool, rather, to kind of give you an idea, a snapshot back in time as to what actually happened to Zion, Dave.
Because you have to figure it out. And right now, what we do know, according to the lead detective in the case, Jonathan Shepard, he said, he's with the Rock Island Police Department. He said they've interviewed everybody. In this particular case, Joe, here's a twist. 2 of Zion's sisters said that Zion was seen playing with a handgun and accidentally shot himself. His sisters tell police that. So now my mind jumps to all the while I was doing this, thinking of the story and thinking of the little boy in the trash can being moved from the basement to the garage and the odor and putting the dryer sheets in the vents and all the things done to cover this up. Now I'm finding out that 2 other children had to either lie or not tell the truth about what happened to their older brother? Is that what we're going to deal with here? And can you tell me, did he shoot himself based on what's left?
There are a few limited positions, and I don't know how strong Zion was. Let's say it's a full-size handgun. Let's say you have so that people can kind of understand. Let's say that it is a handgun the size of what you might see on the utility belt or the service belt of a police officer walking around town. Those are full-size handguns they're carrying. This is not a compact weapon. It takes a bit of strength, certainly for a 10-year-old, to lift this weapon and to then get it in such a position that the muzzle is facing some aspect of his skull, so that when the firing process is initiated and it finally leads to his death, it's going to be difficult to determine. First off, we typically don't have any clothing items covering our face. All right. So if we have a shirt, we'll have a distribution of soot and powder and that sort of thing that we look for. On the skin, like if you're shot in the face or wherever the weapon may have been positioned, you look for soot deposition buried in the skin. We actually call it tattooing because it goes just beneath the layer of the skin. But Dave, here's the rub in all of this. With decomposition, and remember I talked about liquefying, those things are going to change precipitously, as it certainly applies to the soft tissue. Now, whatever bony prominence, let's say cheekbones, the eye sockets, the orbits, the forehead, the temporal area, wherever this round actually entered the head, maybe the surface of the bone can give you some kind of indication, because if it's a press contact wound where you've got that muzzle tightly pressed against the skin will actually, because of this exhaust that is created, will actually balloon out, and you'll see some soot deposition on the bone. If you see that, and that's kind of protected even in a decompositional phase, you might can do an assessment that way. But it's going to be very, very difficult to make heads or tails of this, simply because of the decomposition that's going on. I know that that's horribly disturbing, but I think going back to these siblings, first off, did they witness it? Were they told to keep their mouth shut? And again, that's another level of horror to this thing.
You've got to figure this out. You're the guy that everybody expects can come in here and you and the detectives give us an idea of what happened. But in reality, I'm sitting here while you were describing the gun. Really, in order to shoot yourself in the head, based on how you have to turn your hands if you're pulling the trigger with your index finger, it has to be on purpose, pretty much. You can't a child, if you're playing with a gun, you're shooting out, not up, not in. And so that angle and distance, that's going to mean something. If all they're left with is 2 children telling you what happened, what do you do with that?
Yeah, it's really hard. They're going to have somebody, the police are going to have somebody that deals specifically with kids. And some of the best equipped people are those that deal with child abuse cases. And I'll say it plainly right here. This, to me, ranks right up there with child abuse because of what you're subjecting psychically over this period of time.
Well, one thing we found out in covering this story, Sushi Staples, the mother, DCFS, that's the Department of Children and Family Services in Illinois, first had contact with her back in 2003 and 2004, and at that time removed her 2 oldest children from the home. She has 8 children total, ranging in age from 8 years old to twins. And I'm assuming, since they said children, plural, told them that Zion was playing with the gun. I'm assuming it's the twins, could be wrong, but it doesn't matter because she's got 8 children between the ages of 8 and 20. On top of that, the motive that is being thrown out there for hiding the body is so that she could continue to collect benefits, government benefits, EBT, whether it's food stamps or other benefits. But that's why she hid the body. So now we've got an entire family. Everybody inside that home had to have known, what the smell was. What is that? That's Zion. You want to talk about the abuse you just mentioned, Joe? Think about that. From 8 to 20 years old, and all of them, they're all involved in the cover-up. They know he's dead. They know that's the smell. I wonder, were they made to trade out the dryer sheets in the vents? Were they all covering? We know that these children were homeschooled according to DCFS, that the 2 girls were seen outside playing, but we hear nothing of the other children. I'm assuming at this point, they've all been accounted for. But they're going to come to you and ask you, we know he's got a gunshot wound. We know he's been dead since December. What else can you tell us, Joe? Are you going to be able to narrow it down and give the people the answer they seek?
I think it's going to be very difficult, Dave. I think that because of how advanced, and I know that one of these investigators that had been interviewed relative to this case actually made the statement, we may never know who actually shot Zion or how this actually went down, because further out on that linear timeline you move from that point when the event took place, the more difficult it is to assess the case. And I think that there will be many, many questions left to be answered unless someone wants to come forward and actually state factually what occurred and what time frame it occurred in, whose weapon that was, and did he have a history of playing with a weapon? How did he access the weapon? And kids can accidentally shoot themselves with a weapon that's left unattended in a home. I can see a little boy, picking up a handgun and staring down the muzzle of the barrel. That's a horrible thing to think of, but that could certainly happen. You were 10, I was 10. We're curious, and just to initiate that firing sequence. And here's another thing. We know, or we can at least postulate, I think, the fact that hammer in that weapon was sitting on a live chambered round. If this is a semi-automatic weapon, that means that all you had to do, if the weapon was not on safe, is you initiate that firing sequence. And when it did, it led to Zion's death. To this date, though, Sushi Staples has only been charged. She has not been convicted of any crime. I'm Joseph Scott Morgan, and this is Body Bags.
This is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed human.